Hey guys, it's Mr. Robinson here. We're going to review imperialism in the United States real quick. I want to pay attention to a couple things. Panama Canal, Roosevelt and his big stick policy. We have opening China to trade. Queen Liliuokalani from Hawaii. We have the USS Maine, the ship that explodes at the eve of the Spanish-American War. We have a map of the Spanish-American War right here. Roosevelt, once again, his big stick policy. And then we have Uncle Sam looking like a hungry guy who wants to eat, and he's gobbling up Cuba right there. So let's go ahead and talk about Roosevelt. First, let's review. This is progressive era and imperialism overlap. Roosevelt was known as the trust buster, breaking up monopolies. That was the Sherman Antitrust Act. So if we remember that vocab word, that was the law that allowed the government to break up monopolies. So that's why he's called our trust buster. Now, before Roosevelt actually becomes president, we go to war with Spain. And if you remember, Spain at one time controlled like a quarter of the world's population. However, by the 1890s, its empire has been reduced to basically three areas: Cuba, the Philippines, and Guam. They also have Puerto Rico. Now, Cuba had a lot of sugar plantations, and many Cubans worked those poor farms. And those crops went back to Spain. And just like in Mexico or Colombia or Peru, Cubans began to want their independence from Spain. And the leader, Jose Marti, this is him right here, he says, you know what, Cuba needs to be independent. But the Spanish has a much more powerful military than Cuba. And they sent an army to basically just destroy the rebels. And everyone who fought got put into concentration camps where the conditions were very terrible. Many died of diseases or starvation. So here's some of those children who were very suffering. Now, America hears about these tales of woe coming up from Cuba. And we have some newspaper owners like Joseph Pulitzer or William Randolph Hearst. And they want to sell newspapers. That's their idea. And so they're going to come up with these splashy headlines, and that's called yellow journalism. It's when you exaggerate or sensationalize something in order to sell more newspapers. It's kind of like when you go to the grocery store and you see a flashy headline in a tabloid and they're trying to get you to buy it. And so they come up with these crazy stories like Spanish feed Cuban children to shark. It was complete nonsense, but it sold newspapers. Problem was, many people were reading these thinking it was actually happening. It wasn't exaggerated. So they start to be upset against the Spanish. So that's what we call yellow journalism, trying to exaggerate to sell newspapers, but it distorted. People thought what they were saying was the truth. And so some people said, we need to start thinking about what we can do to help the poor Cubans. So Spain did not really consider the United States a huge threat. When America said, you need to treat your people better, Spain just kind of ignored them. And the ambassador from Spain to the United States wrote a letter. And the letter, someone got a hold of it. And in that letter, he called our president weak. Now, it's one thing for Americans to trash talk their president, but if another country's trash talking our president, that's going to make us mad. So Spain was talking smack about President McKinley. He's weak, he won't do anything, he's all talk. And so this really kind of angered Americans against the Spanish. And right after that happened, we have our ship, the USS Maine, which is right here. It's a brand new ship. It's part of the Great White Fleet. It's a symbol of our new naval might, because we're trying to like puff our chests up a little bit with the rest of the world. So we send it to Havana, to right outside the capital, Havana Harbor. And it's there to just basically remind the Spanish, hey, American businesses are in Cuba. You need to make sure that they're not messed with. And our nice fancy warships here. Problem is, the ship exploded. And over 200 Americans were killed in that explosion. Now think back to yellow journalism. They want to sell newspapers. So they say, hidden Spanish torpedo destroys the Maine. And so we start to hear rallying cries of remember the Maine, which is similar to remember the Alamo. So the Spanish-American War begins not long after that. The first battle actually takes place in the Philippines over in Asia. The Philippines were also part of Spain, named after King Philip, and we start fighting there on May 1st. A couple weeks later, we start to fight in Cuba itself. The Spanish are quickly defeated in the Philippines, and America basically replaces Spain as the conquerors. Right after that, we are fighting in Cuba and in Puerto Rico. Teddy Roosevelt quits his job working for the government, and he actually goes down to Cuba to fight. And his regiment was called the Rough Riders. There's Roosevelt right there. And they actually fight in a really famous battle called the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. And as a result of this, Cuba's going to gain their independence, but the United States is going to gain control of an area called Guantanamo Bay for a naval base. And Guantanamo Bay is right here. Now, just like in the Philippines, we replaced the Spanish in Cuba. Now, Cuba does get their independence, but they basically have to sign an agreement that they will do whatever we tell them to do. Now, one of the things that's a big issue in Cuba is malaria from mosquitoes. And so more people actually died of diseases in the Spanish-American War than actually fighting. So you were more likely to die from a mosquito sting than a bullet. Now, all of Spain's former territories, which included the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and also Guam, were ceded to the United States. And there's Guam. So we gained control of these areas. And it marked the end of Spain being a world power. And it marked the beginning of the United States being a world power. It's kind of like America before this was a JV team, now we're a varsity team. We're one of the stronger countries. And we just beat up on Spain, who was a world power. Now we're here to play. We're a varsity team. But the question was, what do we do with these lands? Do we keep them? Do we give them their independence? And so we actually have two different schools of thoughts. We had imperialists who wanted to annex or make these territories part of the United States, like Puerto Rico is today. And if we didn't take these lands, someone else would. Other people thought that we should not. Those were called the anti-imperialists, and they said it's undemocratic to take over another country.